Hey guys, once again, welcome to Pastor's Toolbox. We're sitting down with Brian Preston. Brian is the lead student pastor at Battlecreek Church. Brian, tell us a little bit about ministry, what it's looked like for you in the last year, what's got you here, I guess.
Yeah. No, it's a pleasure to be on. Thanks for taking the time. Like he said, my title is lead student pastor. And so I get a chance to do student ministry across 6 campuses here in Tulsa with Battlecreek. It is basically the goal for me is I get a chance to serve student ministry across 6 different platforms. And so the cool part about our church is that we are strategically kind of located all over the city of Tulsa, which means that our 6 campuses look vastly different from each other. And so it's always a challenge trying to figure out ministry in general with like, how do you do it inner city context? How do you do it in, upper middle class? How do you do it, just in different across the board in different ways?
What a challenge.
And so that's always challenging. And then you've had this last year, which has been insane and maybe even leveled the playing field to some degree, which is good. But yeah, so I get a chance to serve student ministry across our different campuses. And a lot of my job is coaching and helping build up student pastors to carry out the mission that God's called them to on their campus. So
awesome. Now you say 6, these campuses are in different locations. You talked about different, social means, like that's different cultures. So how did you guys approach opening? Did you just go for it? And then some churches, some campuses maybe didn't come back, or did you handle that in different ways?
Yeah. So once COVID hit, it was interesting to say the least. And we ran probably way too hard, way too fast, like most people. About 8 to 10 weeks in, I was like, there's 0 chance I can sustain the pace that I'm going, And so we're trying to do this or that, as many people are trying to figure out online and all these different things. But as we approach reopening, I think we're in Oklahoma, so our context is a little different than most. And we were pretty open from the beginning. And so in that, we've probably reaped a little bit more of the benefit in some ways, I feel like. Certainly then once we were able to come back all together, we reopened in June officially as a church in person. But even when that happened, we actually came all together. So all of our 6 campuses came to Broken Arrow for several weeks. And it was really interesting because it was like, hey, we're going to bring all these people together. And you would imagine it'd be a social distance nightmare. But at the same time, it was still at the very beginning, a lot of people hadn't returned. And so there was something really kind of cool about the core unity that happened right away in that we actually reopened walking through the book of Acts. And so, almost this restart, if you will, and just seeing the building of the church and then seeing how our church was doing that. And there was a lot of similarities in how we were kind of coming about that process. But then, once things kind of get going and we started splitting back off into different campuses, it was a little interesting because 3 of our campuses are located within the city limits of Tulsa, and Tulsa was mass mandated, but everywhere else was not. And so we were trying to figure out, culturally for sure, some of our campuses that were very staunchly, hey, we're masked up, we're not messing around. And some of ours that were very, if you put that anywhere near me, I'm going to revolt. So it was very unique in that. And we also got to see some of that play out where you might have had some people that were attending a campus normally at Midtown, but they didn't want to wear masks. So they started coming to Broken Arrow. And then you had some that were coming to Broken Arrow, but they were real hesitant to come with nobody wearing masks. So then they went to South Tulsa, and so it's just really interesting to see kind of the dynamic, especially at first, how that all shook out. So
I know that's been hard for pastors across the country, around the world even. But for me personally, that was just philosophically, it was just really hard year associated with just.
It messes with you.
It messed with me, man. It messed with me. When you're looking at this past year, you guys opened in June, which is early. New Vision did as well. There's some churches that have yet to open that are beginning to open in the coming weeks, which is
right.
They're so excited and which is a good thing. Have you guys had you guys seen a lot of ministry happen, a lot of gospel transformation. Have you had any great stories that have happened, in this past year? Is there anything that just sounds, that just I don't know, meant something or was exceptional, remarkable?
Well, and I'd probably more so broad stroke it, but I would say, initially, one of the things that I felt like was so cool about COVID, and maybe somebody would argue that it's not cool, but I thought personally it was, in the sense of when all of that happened, I feel like in a lot of ways it released the average church attender, or the inconsistent, maybe is a better word, church attender, from having to come. And so in a lot of ways, we almost filtered out a lot of people that were just, half in, half out. And it released people in kind of a natural way. And I think that that's really kind of a good thing, because it allowed us to really strengthen the core of our churches in a lot of ways, and, begin to be open to more so, how do we reach people outside these walls?
Yeah, that's good.
And maybe that's not everybody, but I feel like most people I've talked to, that's been kind of the mission and the mantra, is going, hey, we've spent a season building the core, and now we're going, hey, we're almost shifting back to how do we relentlessly pursue people? And certainly we've, in the last year, seen tons of unchurched people, or people that were maybe going to other churches that weren't meeting, come and start visiting and being a part of our church. So that, whether you think that's a good thing or a bad thing, it was good that we were seeing people come in the doors. Yeah. But I think around the time about at the end of last year, beginning of this year, we started seeing a little bit of that pendulum swing back to not just de-church people, but really reaching people again in a fresh way. And so obviously through online platform, we still have been able to have a ministry. I do appreciate our church's approach in that, online is a tool. It's not we're not saying, hey, we're going to be an only online church, or that this is, certainly a part of the mission, but it's a tool that we're using to still reach people and hopefully draw them into a community here, or if they're in another city context somewhere else. But one of the cool things that's come out of that has been people that have been engaging online. We've been able to help come alongside, encourage. Some of them have walked in transformation to accept Christ. And so we've been able to walk through beginning stages of what that relationship with Jesus looks like. But then the goal always being to point them to a community and a body of believers near them. And so we've been able to connect people to a lot of different good churches and different communities. So people in Florida or Texas, California, or across the globe or whatever. And so it's been really neat to see how that's transpired. We've seen a couple of stories where people would watch online, and then they would get so excited about coming to visit that they, one sensed transformation happened in their life, whether it was, they came to Jesus for the first time, or maybe they'd never followed through a believer's baptism. So they'd fly in just to come visit, just to be baptized, which is super encouraging, just to see how the mission went beyond the four walls.
Yeah, it's crazy. Right?
But I think the crazy thing for me has been to see just the astronomical number of people come in that are first-time guests, and then to see God's movement still happening in the wave of some of those things that we oftentimes at churches, we tend to regulate everything to church attendance and baptisms, salvations, those type of things. I would say, one, we've seen a lot of really cool things happen in the sense of just seeing people come in the door, getting them connected to the body of Christ, getting them plugged into community groups, things like that. But even in some of those metrics, we've seen a ton of people come through and follow through in believers' baptism. And so even the last month, I think we've had 60 something baptisms just at Broken Arrow.
That's crazy.
And so just to see God's still moving, God's still wanting to do these things. And how can we continue to come alongside of people that are still walking in relationship with Jesus, whether it's coming to salvation for the first time, which we're seeing, or it's people that are going, hey, you know what, this has really propelled me in my journey to take steps of obedience. So
that's good. Two questions out of what you just said that's really interesting to me, and I think would be really interesting to pastors across the network here. what did you do to strengthen your core? You just talked about that. Like, was it just knowing the people that are in, people that are bold enough to be in? What did you do to like really, you talked about maybe the fringe attenders that gave them an opportunity to not come back, but what have you guys done in this season to strengthen that core? I think that'd be really interesting for.
Well, as a church, we really felt like this last year we were able to double down on some of that, and I say discipleship is a loose term just because for me discipleship is evangelize non-believers and mature the believers, but in the sense of taking people into a greater understanding and walk in their relationship with Jesus, we were able to try some things and do some things to help strengthen the core. So one of those is like, we're a church that runs solely off of community groups. And so if you're not plugged into a community group, you miss out on a lot, because a lot of what we do and the lifeblood of who we are runs through our community groups. So one, we are always pushing people to do community groups. But what we did last year was we started almost series-based community groups, because we have a lot of people who would love to be connected, but they have a hard time connecting. And so, for instance, right now we're walking through this series on Sundays called Giants. And so this past Sunday was week 1. Well, week 1, we launched Giants community group that people could come to our building on a Sunday night at 5:30 and walk in this Giants community, breaking down Alex's sermon, all that kind of stuff. And out of this Giants community group, so we'll do it for 4 or 5 weeks, the length of the series. But then out of this Giants series, we'll launch community groups. So we'll basically take these, I think it was like 50 or 60 people right here at Broken Arrow that we had on Sunday night. Well, we'll take those 50 or 60 and we'll get them, help them create community groups out of these groups that we've formed. And so just helping them attach to a greater understanding in the church, certainly helping them in the walk with Jesus. So that's one element. For student ministry, it was a lot of things like that. We did interest-based discipleship groups to kind of help strengthen our core. Our student leadership team within our student ministry was something that we doubled down on, and we really focused on how can we build up the students that are already here, that are coming, that are part every single week, things like that. And so it became less about, in the last year, it became less about how are we constantly going, but more so how are we building up the core. But now, like I said, we've switched and we're really seeing a laser focus on evangelism, where we've taken these core, we built them up and equipped them, and then we've challenged them to say, hey, we've got to go reach people. And so for me, always one of my kind of core missions as a pastor has been, I want to reach people to equip them, and then I want to equip them to reach other people. And so that's kind of where we're shifting now, is like, hey, we've done a decent job of equipping people. So now let's take those equipped and go, hey, how are you investing in inviting? How are you getting into your world? How are you taking the gospel to where you are? And I think some of that is less of, we still do some events that draw people into the church, but a lot of it is challenging our people to go, how can you take this mission, this word, and go and reach other people? One last thing is that last year, during quarantine, our pastor launched in similar way some interest-based discipleship groups, really kind of a master classes, if you will. And so I was able to lead a master class for our church where people signed up, and mine was, how do you share your faith? And so I took a bunch of adults who signed up for this master class for 5 weeks, and we met on Zoom and we talked about how do you share your faith. And by the end of it, I had them sharing their faith with me and then talking about strategies on how they can take the gospel into their world. And so I think so much of what we do as building up the core is to hopefully then equip them to go and reach other people.
That's great. Now, when the pandemic happened, did you find yourself when you talk about leader, you talk about your core, and I guess this is part of this question. Did you find yourself writing more notes? Did you find yourself like making more phone calls? What did that look like?
Oh my gosh, yeah.
When you talk about groups, are you talking about group meeting on campus? You're talking about online? You said Zoom. Just give a brief clarity on that. That'd be great.
Yeah. Well, during quarantine, it was certainly nothing but Zoom, and Zoom exhaustion is a real thing. But now it's more so meeting in person for sure. But yes, when all that went down last year, it was almost reverting back to what I knew when I first started, which was, making those phone calls every single week, contacts every single week, which we do a lot of that around events where we're calling parents and connecting with students and trying to get them to sign up for things, yada, yada. But I think during those first, 10 to 20 weeks, it was like every week I had a rotation of people that I was calling church-wide, outside of student ministry. Hey, how you doing? What's going on? What can I be doing for you? How can we be praying for you? And it was it was encouraging for me because I'm just such a relational person, but it was very relational ministry, and for me to call a 70-year-old couple in our church and for me to just say, hey, we love you. We want you to know we're here. If there's anything we can be praying for. And for them to just in value in going, hey, man, we're so thankful that you would even make the call, and then be able to share some of the stories that are coming out of what God's teaching them or what they need prayer for was super encouraging.
It's kind of forced, like big church, small church, you talk about leveling the playing ground. You can talk about that as far as online impact and stuff. But the reality is that like it forced really anyone in a large seat to pastor again. I know that sounds weird, but like actually reach out, call, follow up. And so it's been a really impactful thing. I've heard from a lot of people that's been super impactful because I think that, you lose sight of that with mass text messages and emails and social media and all the other things. While those are so needed and so important for a church to move forward in reaching people, there is something lost when you stop connecting to that core. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah, I think the bigger your church gets, it's easier. And really you should, right? You should equip volunteers and layers of leadership to help carry out the work in ministry. That's what the goal is. But as a pastor, not losing connection as a shepherd. And I think that's what was such a beautiful period of time, was God allowing us to go, hey, don't lose connection to the people that you're leading.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. It's kind of like that Matt Redman story where he, did no instruments, did heart of worship back in the day. It's kind of like getting back to the heart of pastoring even, and that's caring for people and reestablishing that core through forms of discipleship and equipping the saints for works of service, which is what the purpose of the church is about. So thank you for sharing that. I know that's vulnerable. I know it's a beautiful thing that many people have learned in this season. Landing on this space for summer. Summer is coming. It has been a nightmare, even for I know the church that I attend, I'm a part of, they didn't even know if they were going to do VBS till 3 weeks ago, and they were already recruiting. So I would love to know your story of camp. If you're having it, if you're doing alternative things, how you're managing capacity or deciding capacity, and then also social distancing, whatever the case might be. Why don't you just let us know what you're doing? This is a case study. You have a lot of kids, a lot of influence, and a lot of problems. So I'm just curious what your I guess spring has been, winter into spring, and then what is your summer going to look like?
Yeah, you mentioned the key phrase, more people, more problems a lot of times, or at least more challenges, I will say. So it's been a whirlwind, to say the least. And I think everybody would agree with that and echo that. For us, in our context, like I said, we have 6 campuses. So doing anything where we come all together, we call it central or global, when our students are able to come all together in one location. We were not able to do that for a whole year. And as a central, lead student pastor, that drove me crazy because I just wanted to meet and I wanted to be together. And so we were able to meet eventually across the different campuses. But from February of 2020 until February of 2021, our student ministry was not able to come together. And so then when we were able to in 2021, this past February, we did a thing called TUO Weekend, which is a kind of a conference experience over a weekend. And we've been doing no overnight conference experience for 3 years now, which I would argue with most people that I sensed probably 2 years ago that no overnights in student ministry was probably going to go away in 5 to 7 years. So then the COVID hit, and I would say it probably expedited that process a little bit. So, and I can explain what I mean by that later. But TUL Weekend, we had an event, and we were able to put it on. Thankfully, we didn't cancel, we didn't postpone. We were able to come all together in one location here at our Broken Arrow campus. And we did. We had like 2 pages of like COVID rules, and rules is probably a harsh word, but had things that guidelines that we were setting in place, going, hey, this is what we're going to be doing, and this is what we're going to the process in which we're going to do it. And so that way, putting some parents' minds at ease and things like that. What I was shocked by was that originally I thought, well, I'm okay if we had like 50% of what we had the year before. And what I was shocked by was 2 weeks out, we were probably around 50%. But that was when we started having a huge influx of people sign up, because it's almost like we're now, even a last minute culture of people signing up for things has always kind of been the case, at least here. But I would say even more so, it's PTSD going, I don't know that things aren't going to get canceled or postponed.
Right.
So I'm just going to wait until the last minute. And so in that, we had a huge influx of people come to be a part of that event. We ended up having 92% of what we had the year before, which was almost 100%, which is unbelievable in this day and age. And so it made it a little bit even more challenging to follow some of those guidelines, but we held to it for the most part. And so we were able to do that, which was the first event we had in the year where all of our students came together. As far as camp goes, we're doing an event in a couple of weeks called Dodgeball, where we're able to do that across different campuses. So it's not all in one place. But camp, we are trying to do one location, and we're planning that for July this year. Robert, when I tell you it has been a nightmare, it would be an understatement. I have never had as hard of a time planning one event in 12 years of doing student ministry that as I have this year. And it's been partly because, one, our facility and our location that we had planned to do fell through. Actually, they went in foreclosure. And then the trying to get another facility where we would go away and stay overnight somewhere has been crazy, because a lot of places are carrying over deposits from year to year and things like that. And so we just had an unbelievably hard time getting anything nailed down. And then when we thought we had something nailed down, it would shift, it would change, they were double booked, whatever the case was. And so all that to say, it wasn't until the week before Easter that we finally solidified, this is what we're going to do this summer, which I don't have to tell you, but like as a leader of a ministry, like I love to use events as momentum for other events. And so building momentum off of one to help jolt another one. And so like coming out of TUL weekend in February, we've always done camp signups that Sunday.
Oh yeah.
To be able to launch out and be able to have like 300 signups in one day or something like that. And so we weren't able to do that. And so we didn't have the final plan until like the week before Easter. And then on that Harvest Sunday, which was a week before Easter, we launched our camp signups. And so it's been a slow roll to say the least. But I think, coming out of Dodgeball in this next month, I think we'll see a lot of influx in that, but we had to shift. And so now this year, instead of doing an away experience where historically we've done all of our students, junior high, high school, one location all together, 1,000 kids in a room, which has been, one of the coolest parts about it. To be able to worship together. But this year we're going, okay, well, let's split. We tried to do a junior high, high school. We talked about doing a junior high local at one point, high school away. And now we've kind of solidified, at least for this year. I think next year we could go back or do something different or whatever. And I think a lot of that hinges on kind of what this year holds. But as of right now, we're doing a high school local experience from a Sunday to a Wednesday. And then we're doing a junior high local experience from a Wednesday to a Friday, and kind of having this crossover night. So there's a lot of cool things that we're going to do with that. But
have you reduced your capacity? I mean, have you done any
essentially by dividing it out, we will. And so instead of having, 1,000 kids in a room, we'll have hopefully, 500 in each or roundabout. And so that way we can be able to do, spread out a little bit more, have a little bit more, room to play with.
And spread out your worship center is how big?
It's about 1,000, holds about 1,000. So yeah, we can be able to spread out a little bit. And so it's different, and a lot of families, they're not upset. I think they understand for the most part of the year that we're in, but I think they're a little saddened, because it's not what we've historically done, or it's different. We have a lot of juniors and seniors this year that are facing things that from the last 2 years or last year and a half that they've that they're just tired. They hate that, things are not the way that they hoped that they would go. Right. And, even this past Sunday, I stood up in front of our students here at BA, and I literally said, like, in a call to worship moment, like, hey, I want you to know, like, I'm wrestling this morning with disappointment, with frustration, with this process. And I walk through certainly what God's been doing in my life now, but even through this whole camp planning, and spoke to that, called it out, and just said, hey, like, I know we're all dealing with this, but at the same time, I do feel like in so many ways, how hard it's been to plan this thing last year has been a little bit of the result of we're trying to put old wine in new wineskin. Yeah. And how God is really just going, no, like, at least for this year, at least right now, what I'm sensing is God's wanting to put new wine in new wineskins, and he's wanting to do something different. In a lot of ways, like we spoke to a minute ago, I feel like we're laser focused on evangelism in a way for camp this year that we haven't been in a lot of ways in years past. And I think that's one of the things that God is solidifying for us, is going, hey, we have an opportunity here. We're local. It's crazy inexpensive as reference to, years past when we've done camp. So hopefully we're able to get and bring in more students, or at least more kids who normally wouldn't come to camp, and be able to help come alongside them. And there's a lot of cool things that we're going to do, and some people that we're going to bring in, things like that. But by and large, the experience going, hey, God's going to do something in this, and we want you to be a part of it. And we want God to do something in your life that week that would shake the foundation of who you are, that would help you grow in your faith, that would help you maybe even encounter him for the first time. And I think that's where, even though there's been such disappointment and frustration that led us here, now we're going, okay, let's flip it, because we feel like God is really up to something in this.
Cool. I want to speak to the historical strategy, and then ask you a question about your camp and your follow-up. Historically, a general practice is, and you spoke to it just a little bit, but I want to point it out just for people if they haven't necessarily thought about it, but having a why to an event. Obviously, an event is to exalt, glorify the name of Jesus, to share that promise, that truth, that hope. But also, coming out of that event, you're pushing to the next event, or there's a strategy behind the exit of the event, beyond just obviously the move of the Spirit that night, but also engaging with parents and letting them know what's to come. Okay. Right. And so that's a common strategy in churches to, like, grow hype for the next event, attendance, or whatever the case might be, whether the event is your Wednesday night service or whether it's camp. Right. Now, you said that you could not obviously do that because you had no plans. So I guess this is a yes or no kind of question. Are you back at making phone calls to parents, or, Yeah,
100%. Yeah. It's interesting, now, like, I mean, certainly we've got other things going on. So, it's not like
there's still opportunity to promote.
Right. So we're promoting, we're still able to, like, coming out of dodgeball next week, I think we can certainly see some promotion and different things happen that night to even get kids signed up, that type of thing. But it has been a lot more of going like, hey, we're going to do some call nights. We're going to get with parents, and we're going to get on the phone and talk through and just explain, just like we just talked about, the things that have been difficult, but at the same time, we truly feel like God is going to do something that week, and we want your kid to be a part of it.
All right. One last super controversial question, and this is yes or no. You don't have to give any descriptor or anything. Ready for this? All right. Have you guys pushed an opinion on vaccinations?
As a church? No, we haven't.
Perfect. I was just curious. I know that it's a topic that's important to a lot of people.
Yeah.
Man, I'm so grateful for your time today. Really thankful. And I'm sure a lot of
it's an honor. One last thing I would say, Robert, is people are kind of processing through, certainly from a student ministry standpoint, but I think church as a whole, as we move forward together, it's more so, even more so a place of value for me of going, who are the people in our church that we can empower, we can equip, and we can help shoulder the load as we move forward together. I think so much of what COVID did was bring out the fact that a lot of pastors and church staff members were running the thing and then trying to run the thing on for however long during a pandemic, when there's so many capable people in our churches that can help come alongside of. And so one of the things that we do as a church and that I do as a student ministry is we call them dream teamers, but we equip a dream team for every single thing that we do, whether it's camp, whether it's Wednesdays and Sundays, whether it's, we had a girls' night last Thursday, like anything that we do, we're calling a group of leaders. We're going, hey, we want you to come be a part of this. And so like for camp, I've got a camp director that's over the whole thing. That's a volunteer. We have 10 student staff members, but I would say 90% of what we do for camp is done by volunteers, and so just understanding too, like no matter what happens in the future, whether we hit a COVID 2.0, God forbid, or we do something or something else transpires, I think we've got to continue as pastors, as church staff people, to equip the saints to come alongside, to carry out the work of the ministry. And like you said, get back to a lot of the personal connection, shepherding, and doing ministry that way so that we can continue to equip people along the way. So take that for what it's worth. But that's
ladies and gentlemen, the mic drop. Lead student pastor, Brian Preston.
Let's go.
Hey, man, thank you so much for your time.
Really, man. Thanks for having me on.